never imagined that a single night, a single careless choice could set my entire life spiraling into a story I would still be telling years later. My name is Chloe Richards. I'm 32 years old, and I've learned more about betrayal, revenge, and survival than I ever wanted to. People often mistake me for someone fragile because of my appearance, because I don't fit neatly into the narrow standards of beauty society worships. But those who've truly seen me, who've crossed me, they know I carry fire in my veins. The night it all began, I was invited to a lavish party in New York. I wasn't there to celebrate or network. I had my own reasons, my own carefully laid plan. The man at the center of it all was Lucas Marshall. If you know his name, you probably know it in connection with power, wealth, and ruthless ambition. He was the kind of man who devoured smaller businesses just to prove he could, who crushed people without a second thought. He had done it to my family. My father, my gentle, hard-working father, was one of his victims. And though Lucas probably never even remembered his name, the ashes of my father's company were burned into my memory like scars that would never fade. My father's downfall had led to his despair, and ultimately to the night I found him cold and lifeless in our small home. That memory haunted me every single day. So when I heard through whispers that Lucas had agreed to a bet, a cruel, arrogant game proposed by one of his so-called friends, I knew fate had delivered me an opening. The terms were simple. He had to marry a woman completely unlike his type. A woman like me. To Lucas, it was meant to be another game, another conquest, another chance to prove he could bend anyone to his will. To me, it was the beginning of my revenge. The first time we met, I made sure he knew I wasn't intimidated. We sat across from each other in a glittering restaurant where the chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars. His smile was measured, calculated, the smile of a man who thought he already owned me. But I looked straight into his eyes and said, "I know about the bet." I'll never forget the flicker of surprise on his face. He tried to hide it, but I saw it. He wasn't used to being disarmed so quickly. I told him plainly, 6 months and not a day more. I wouldn't be his pawn. I wouldn't be dazzled by his penthouse or his tailored suits. I had my own reasons, and he didn't need to know them. Not yet. Our marriage was cold, mechanical, nothing more than a contract. I walked into his penthouse the way a soldier walks onto a battlefield, prepared, steady, unwilling to surrender. He showered me with diamonds, designer dresses, invitations to glittering galas. I refused it all. I wore what I wanted. I lived by my own schedule, and every time he tried to assert control, I pushed back harder. It unsettled him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his carefully rehearsed charm began to crack. He wasn't winning, and for Lucas Marshall, not winning was unbearable. But beneath his arrogance, I began to sense something else, something hollow. He was used to bending people to his will because deep down he was terrified of facing himself. I saw it every time he tried to trap me with his wealth, every time he whispered, "Any other woman would be grateful for this life." I stared right back and said, "I'm not any other woman," and I meant it. Still, there were nights when the silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. I would stand on the balcony watching the city pulse with neon light and wonder if I was strong enough to carry this secret plan to the end. Because revenge is never simple. It eats at you. It curls up inside your chest like a thorny vine, whispering that maybe you're becoming just like the person you despise. But then I'd remember my father's face, the despair in his eyes before he was gone, and I'd know I couldn't stop. Not yet. Lucas thought he was the predator in this game. He thought he was dissecting me, studying me, plotting how to break me down. But what he didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment for years. Every smile I gave him, every refusal, every quiet moment of defiance, it was all part of something bigger. I wanted him to feel powerless. I wanted him to know what it was like to live inside the ruins of someone else's ambition. And most of all, I wanted him to see that no amount of money, no gleaming penthouse or glittering watch, could erase the blood on his hands. There was a night not long after the wedding when he finally cracked. His voice rose, his words sharp. "What do you want from me, Chloe? Respect, control. No woman has ever resisted me the way you do." His anger was real, but underneath it there was desperation. He couldn't stand that I didn't bend, and I, with all the calm I could muster, looked him straight in the eye and said, "What I want is respect. What I want is for you to realize you're empty inside. You can buy everything in this world, Lucas, but not me." My words landed like a blow. For the first time I saw him falter, and in that faltering I knew the game was turning in my favor. The weeks that followed were like walking across a tightrope stretched over fire. Every moment between Lucas and me was charged with tension, sometimes silent, sometimes explosive. He tried new tactics to corner me. He blocked my career opportunities, interfered with meetings I had arranged, and cut off connections that could have helped me stand on my own. It was his way of reminding me that I was living in his world under his roof. But the more he tried, the more I resisted. My strength became my shield, and his frustration only grew. I could see it in his eyes late at night when the city lights washed over his face in cold silver. He hated that I was unmoved by his power. He hated that for once he couldn't bend someone to his will. And perhaps that hatred was mixed with something he didn't know how to name, an unwilling respect, maybe even a kind of fear. One night, after yet another argument that ended with him pacing the living room like a caged animal, I let my mask slip. Just for a moment. I said to him quietly, "You think you're the one in control, Lucas? But you're wrong. I have my own plan. And when the time is right, you'll see that this whole game is bigger than you ever imagined." The look on his face in that instant was unforgettable. For the first time since I met him, I saw genuine fear flicker in his eyes. He didn't admit it, but I knew he had underestimated me. Days blurred into nights, and the walls of that penthouse became a silent battleground. He tried to seduce me with charm, to lure me with wealth, to break me with forceful control. And yet every gesture only pushed me further away. My defiance became his obsession. He was unraveling, and I could feel it, but something unexpected was happening to me too. In my determination to make him suffer, I began to see the cracks in his armor. Beneath the arrogance and the wealth, Lucas was empty, lonely in a way that money could never cure. I caught glimpses of him late at night, staring out the glass windows with his reflection staring back like a stranger. There was a part of me that wondered, was this the man who had destroyed my family? Or was he just another broken soul too weak to face the cost of his own greed? Still, I couldn't let myself soften. Not yet. My father's face was always there in my mind. The sound of his voice. The memory of finding him gone because a man like Lucas had decided his life and his company were expendable. That grief was my fuel, my compass. Then came the night that changed everything. Lucas walked into the penthouse after one of his long, boastful dinners, expecting me to be waiting in the shadows of his wealth. But instead, I was ready for him. He demanded answers why I resisted, why I refused to play the role of the obedient wife. His voice cracked with desperation, and I finally decided it was time. I looked him in the eyes, and for the first time since our sham of a marriage began, I spoke the truth. "You think I'm just a woman you married for a bet. You think this is your game. But you've been the pawn all along, Lucas. Do you remember the Richards family? No, you wouldn't. You crushed my father's company. You ruined him. And when the dust settled, he lost more than his business. He lost his will to live. He was my father, Lucas, and because of you, he's gone." I will never forget the way his face drained of color. The mighty Lucas Marshall frozen in silence. My words hit him harder than any rejection ever could. For the first time I watched him break. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't look away. My voice was steel when I said, "This entire marriage, this entire bet was never about you proving yourself. It was about me showing you what it feels like to be powerless, to be trapped, to lose everything." The silence afterward was suffocating. He opened his mouth searching for words, but none came. And for once, I didn't fill the silence for him. I simply turned away and left him standing there, shattered by the truth. That night, I slept in another room. And though my heart ached with the weight of my confession, I felt stronger than I ever had before. He finally knew. He finally understood that the game he thought he had been winning was already lost. But revenge is a strange, bitter thing. Even after the truth was out, even after I had delivered the blow I'd been carrying for years, I felt no peace. Instead, the air between us grew heavier. Lucas began to wither under the weight of guilt. He avoided my eyes, stumbled through his once confident routines, and for the first time he was the one silenced by shame. And yet, I couldn't ignore the faintest shift in my own heart. Seeing him broken didn't bring me the satisfaction I had once dreamed of. It only reminded me of how much had been lost. How nothing, not even his suffering, could bring my father back. After that night, the air in the penthouse changed forever. Silence became our cruelest weapon. I no longer shouted at him, no longer fought against his attempts at control. I didn't need to. My silence pierced him more deeply than any words ever could. At breakfast, I would sit across from him with my coffee, never looking up. At night, I slipped into bed without a word, turning my back on him, until sleep or sorrow finally took me. I could feel the weight of my presence pressing down on him, suffocating him. This was my revenge, and it was working. Lucas Marshall, the man who once commanded rooms with arrogance and power, was shrinking before my eyes. He was losing meetings, fumbling through deals, and snapping at colleagues who had once admired him. His world was crumbling, not because I shouted, but because I refused to give him the validation he craved. And yet beneath it all, there was a gnawing emptiness in me too. I told myself it was justice, that watching him break was the only way I could honor my father's memory. But late at night, when I stood on the balcony and let the cold wind brush against my face, I would ask myself, was this enough? Would anything ever be enough? Lucas began to change in ways I didn't expect. He stopped boasting, stopped flaunting his money, stopped trying to buy my affection. Instead, he became quiet, haunted. Sometimes I would catch him staring at me with eyes that were no longer arrogant, but desperate. One evening, after another failed attempt at conversation, he whispered so softly, I almost didn't hear it. I don't know how to fix this, Chloe. I don't know how to fix what I did. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But the memories came flooding back, the sound of my father's voice, the weight of his despair the night I lost not only him but everything. And so I stayed silent. Still, something inside Lucas shifted. He began to notice the little things about me, the things no one else had ever paid attention to. The way I preferred my coffee strong with no sugar. The flowers I loved, peonies, the kind my father used to bring home for my mother. The quiet music I listened to when I thought no one was near. One morning I walked into the kitchen to find a bouquet of peonies on the table. No note, no words, just the flowers. I wanted to ignore them, to throw them away. But instead I found myself standing there, inhaling their scent until tears burned in my eyes. It was maddening, this tug of war inside me. I wanted to hate him, to keep him buried under the rubble of his own guilt. And yet, when he stood beside me on the balcony one night, offering me a cup of tea without a word, I found myself taking it. We stood together in silence, the city sprawling beneath us, and for the first time in weeks, the air between us didn't feel poisonous, it felt fragile. Why are you doing this? I finally asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the skyline and said, because I realized that words don't matter anymore. I can't undo what I did, but I want to show you that I'm trying to be different. His voice trembled slightly, and for a second I didn't see the powerful businessman. I saw a man stripped bare, a man who had finally begun to understand the cost of his own sins. But forgiveness doesn't come so easily, it never does. Days passed, and his gestures continued, quiet, steady, almost desperate. He canceled business meetings to be home. He made coffee the way I liked it. He sat near me without speaking, waiting for me to decide if he deserved my voice again. And slowly, almost against my will, I felt the edges of my anger soften. But just as I began to think, maybe he could change, another truth surfaced. A truth even I had kept buried deep within myself. One night, as rain tapped against the glass windows, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, demanding to be spoken. I looked at him, my voice trembling as I whispered, "You think you know what you took from me, Lucas. But you don't. It wasn't just my father, it wasn't just our company, I was pregnant. His face crumpled as though I had struck him. He blinked, unable to process the words. "What?" he whispered. "I was pregnant when it all collapsed," I said, tears spilling freely now. "The stress, the loss, the grief, it cost me my child. Our child. And you never even knew because you never cared enough to see the destruction you left behind." The silence that followed was unbearable. Lucas sank into the couch, burying his face in his hands. I watched his shoulders shake, and for the first time I saw him cry. Not the tears of a man who had lost a deal, but the raw, broken sobs of someone who finally realized the true weight of what they had destroyed. I didn't know, he choked out. "God, Chloe, I didn't know, and I can never forgive myself for it." Neither could I. The confession hung in the air between us like smoke that wouldn't clear. I had carried that secret for so long, tucked it away in the darkest corners of my heart, where no light could reach. And now, seeing Lucas broken before me, I felt both vindicated and hollow. My words had gutted him, yet they didn't bring my baby back, didn't erase the nights I had cried myself to sleep with hands pressed against an empty belly. For days after that, Lucas moved like a ghost through the penthouse. His once commanding stride had become slow, hesitant, as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. He avoided his reflection in the tall glass windows, as if afraid of the man who stared back. I should have felt triumphant. I should have savored every second of his suffering. And part of me did, but another part, the part of me that still bled from old wounds, wondered if I was only deepening my own scars by watching him unravel. I wanted to believe he couldn't change, that his apologies were empty, that his gestures were calculated. But little by little, I saw something shifting in him. He began leaving the penthouse, not for meetings or deals, but to visit people whose names I didn't know. He returned quieter, worn down, yet strangely lighter in a way. I followed him once, not out of suspicion but curiosity, and what I discovered stunned me. Lucas was knocking on doors of families whose businesses he had destroyed. I watched from a distance as he bowed his head, as he listened to their rage, as he apologized with a sincerity I had never seen in him before. He wasn't offering excuses. He was offering reparation. Money, yes, but also time. He sat at kitchen tables in homes smaller than his master bathroom, drinking cheap coffee, looking humbled in a way I never thought possible. When he came home that night, I confronted him. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice hard but my heart unsteady. He looked at me with eyes stripped of arrogance. "Because I can't change the past, but I can try to mend what's left of the damage. I don't expect forgiveness, not from them, not from you, but I need to try." For the first time, I couldn't find a sharp reply. His words felt raw, unpolished, real, and I hated that a small part of me wanted to believe him. As weeks passed, his efforts grew. He set up funds for small businesses, gave opportunities back to people he had once crushed, and volunteered time at places he would have sneered at months ago. Each act wasn't grandiose, it was deliberate, almost penitent. And though I kept my distance, I found myself watching him with new eyes. One evening I was on the balcony again, wrapped in a blanket, when he joined me. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he placed a steaming cup of tea in my hands. We stood together in silence, the city stretching out below us like a sea of broken glass. Finally, he said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Chloe. I know that. But I want to become a man who might deserve it someday." I turned to him, and for the first time, I didn't see the monster who had destroyed my family. I saw a man who was bleeding from wounds of his own, making a man desperately clawing for redemption. And that terrified me more than his cruelty ever had, because it meant my heart was no longer safe. Then came the night that would change us both forever. He was preparing for another late meeting, straightening his tie with mechanical precision, when I surprised myself by saying, "Don't go." The words slipped out before I could stop them. He froze, turning to look at me with disbelief. "Stay," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Just stay here tonight." He dropped his phone onto the table without hesitation. For hours we sat together on the couch, not touching, not even speaking much. But in that silence, something fragile was born. I told myself it was only curiosity, that I wanted to see how far he would go. But deep down, I knew it was more. We began to share small moments, trivial conversations over breakfast, quiet laughter at something neither of us expected to find funny. Slowly the ice began to thaw, though neither of us dared to name what was happening. And then one evening he looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Chloe," he said softly, "I don't want this to end. Not the bet, not the marriage, not us. I know I don't deserve you, but I love you. I love you in a way I didn't think I was capable of. And I want us to be real." I should have pushed him away. I should have reminded him of the ruins he had left behind. But instead, I felt tears sting my eyes as I whispered the words I never thought I would say: "I love you too." It was terrifying to admit. Terrifying to allow my heart to reach for something with the very man I had once sworn to destroy. And yet in that moment, I realized that revenge had led me here. Not to his ruin, but to a crossroad where forgiveness and love waited in fragile balance. The night I confessed that I loved him, something inside me broke open. For years I had lived with my anger pressed against my chest like a shield, keeping me alive, but also keeping me trapped. And now here I was, sitting across from the man who had once been my enemy, whispering words I swore I would never speak. The days that followed were quiet, almost tender. Lucas didn't rush me, didn't press for more. Instead he gave me space, as if he understood that love, real love, had to be rebuilt, brick by brick, not demanded like a prize. He canceled meetings, spent more time at home, and devoted himself to small acts that spoke louder than any apology ever could. Coffee in the mornings, flowers left where I'd find them. His presence beside me, not as a shadow of control, but as a companion who was learning day by day how to simply be there. I found myself softening in ways I hadn't expected. I laughed again, at first cautiously, then more freely. Our conversations, once stiff and guarded, began to stretch into long hours at night, where we spoke not of deals or revenge, but of dreams, regrets, and the pieces of ourselves we had never shared with anyone else. It was terrifying, this opening of the heart. But it was also healing. And then months later, life offered me a twist I never could have imagined. One morning, I woke up nauseous, the world spinning in a way I hadn't felt since that terrible time years ago. Fear gripped me, but when the doctor confirmed it, when I heard the word pregnant, I felt a rush of emotion so overwhelming I could barely breathe. I was terrified, yes, but also hopeful. Telling Lucas was the hardest part. I expected panic, denial, maybe even regret. But when I whispered the words, "I'm pregnant," he looked at me as though I had handed him the entire universe. His eyes filled with tears. His voice broke with laughter and sobs all tangled together, and he pulled me into his arms. "We'll do this right," he whispered. "This time, we'll do everything right." For the first time in years I believed him. Not long after, Lucas asked me to marry him again, but not as part of a bet, not as a cruel game, not as a contract. This time it was for love. No tricks, no conditions, he said, his voice trembling. Just us, just forever. And so we stood together once more, this time in a small ceremony filled not with glittering strangers, but with a handful of people who mattered. There were no champagne bets, no flashing cameras, no empty spectacle. Just vows spoken from trembling lips, promises carved not in arrogance, but in humility and love. As I stood across from him, the weight of our past pressed against us, but so did the fragile, beautiful possibility of our future. I knew forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a choice I would have to make every day. And I knew he would have to keep proving again and again that he was worthy of the life we were about to build together. But for the first time since my father's death, I felt the heavy chains of grief begin to loosen. Later that night, after the ceremony, as music faded and guests left, we danced slowly in the quiet. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. And with tears in my eyes I whispered, "Who would have thought it would all begin with a bet?" Lucas smiled, holding me closer, his voice soft but steady. "Who would have thought it would turn out to be the best bet I ever made?" I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment. And for the first time I let myself believe in redemption, not just for him, but for me too. Because love, fragile and terrifying as it is, can sometimes grow even from the ashes of betrayal. And maybe that's the lesson I want to leave with you. Life will break us. People will betray us. The pain may carve itself so deeply into our bones that we think we'll never heal. But sometimes, against all odds, love finds its way through the cracks. Sometimes the people who hurt us most can still change. And sometimes, if we're brave enough, we can choose to let them. Not for their sake, but for ours. For the chance to stop living in the ruins of our past and start building something new. If my story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And if you've ever carried the weight of betrayal or struggled with the question of forgiveness, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters more than you know.